Well, good afternoon, everybody. There's still a few folks joining through the waiting room, so I was just going to give it another couple beats before we get started, but awesome attendance this afternoon. I'll go ahead and get us kicked off. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Pat O'Connell. I'm the chair of the New Mexico Utility Commission, and anytime we're in a moment like this, I always like to start with the let's be sure we're all on the same airplane question. So, what we're here to do today is to work to enable a path forward to better electric markets across the West. The best market will have the largest possible footprint. So, big feet are good in this situation. It means that we're going to have more options. Options create opportunities. And specifically, I'm looking forward to opportunities for lower costs and to ensure reliability and to help as we transition to a lower carbon electric grid. Your contributions are critical to moving this effort forward. So thank you for being here, and I'll thank you in advance for what you're going to contribute to this effort. We have a few presentations planned for this afternoon. And we also have a very large group of folks on board. So as always, your comments, your questions are important. That's why we're here. So for in this format, if you could submit your questions using the Q&A window, not the chat window, we'll be able to address them better and handle them better. We also built in some time on the agenda. So after each one of the speakers speak, we are anticipating opportunity for some Q&A there. So again, put your questions into the Q&A window. And then, as we wrap this up, we'll describe steps moving forward. If you have any written comments, please send those. Next kind of deadline or nodal point on this effort in terms of responding and collecting comments will be October 13th. So any written comments you want to send in today through October 13th, we'll get it into the hopper for the next convening of this team. So today's about moving forward. So we're going to start by addressing questions that we've received so far, and then move on to describing our ideas of how to take the next step. So again, thank you for the time being that you've taken out of your schedule to be here. I'm excited by the idea that, hey, that maybe this time's different. So this is a great example of that, bringing this group together, because we're all here to try to move the ball forward. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Alice Reynolds from California.
Great. Thank you for that fantastic introduction, Pat. And really happy to be here and see all of you. As we heard, just great attendance. So I wish we could be all together in person, but seeing you on camera is almost as good and much more efficient, right? And so I wanted to just step back and get a little bit of background. Maybe we could go ahead and go to the first slide. I think you all know what we're here to talk about and have all been involved in discussions regarding greater West-wide regional cooperation for a long time and from different perspectives. And so I'm sure a lot of you some of you have been working on this for years, and some of you are relatively new to the effort. And so I won't take you all the way back and talk about the long history that took us to where we are today, but I did want to start with just the proposal that was that germinated this initiative. And it did come from California and then quickly became a discussion among regulators of the Western states. And when we were talking about it, we wanted it to be transparent and inclusive throughout. And so that's why we're here today, and that's why we asked for comments and put out a skeleton straw proposal. We didn't want to get too far ahead of including all stakeholder opinions and input. And so, but I did want to talk a little bit about the thinking that went into the proposal. And so I think, in California, we really wanted to build on some of those benefits that Pat talked about and have a venue to do that. So have a venue to make our pathway real. And a venue for discussion, but also a clear path and a way to put that together and effectuate it. And the need, I think everyone knows here, the discussion for a long time has been surrounding independent governance of CAISO's market services. And then the other thing we heard is that there are various entities throughout the West who are interested in a pathway to an RTO, and that would necessarily for them involve independent governance. And this pathway would be with the vision of a large market footprint, including California, as Pat mentioned. And really, this is about capitalizing on benefits and the progress that we've already made, but then having a way to move forward to the future. So if we could go to the next slide. Just to be very clear about the fundamental underpinning of this, and I've already said a few times maximizing benefits. I want to make sure that it's clear that that's what we're thinking about here. It's for all states, and we've seen benefits from EIM. We've seen benefits to ratepayers. So really, this is about customers and achieving West-wide benefits for everyone. We've thought about equitable representation and independence and autonomy. So that's having a way to think about a structure that is inclusive and has a governance, a board of governors that is independent. And then also operational, being having options and being flexible. And we've gotten some questions about, is this immediately going to be an RTO? Is this a concept for market services? And the starting place is we want to, first of all, build that vision as we go forward, but also provide options for participants. Some participants might want a full RTO, and we might eventually get to that place, and others might not want an RTO ever and just want to have no interest in joining an RTO. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so in talking a little bit about the details of the proposal and where we are, this is really about approaching independent governance differently. And I think you're all aware of efforts, legislative efforts to kind of, as a starting place, saying, all right, we have to change CAISO's governance, and then we go from there. This is about continuing with EIM, continuing with EDAM, and approaching governance from the perspective of let's build the independent entity, figure out what governance would look like, recognize that we would be leveraging what we're already building in the market so that we know we're not starting from scratch. We know what the market's going to look like, and it would be shifting over to this independent entity. And we have a forum to talk about what governance would look like and how this transition could look and how we can actually make it happen while retaining the benefits that our utilities have already invested in for the benefit of ratepayers. And so we have a proposal out to develop and launch a new entity. And again, this would be iterative, starting with a launch committee that you're going to hear a little bit more about later when we talk through a straw proposal for different steps. We are contemplating a broad stakeholder process, so every step of the way involving stakeholders. And then again, building on investments in and success of EIM and running parallel to EDAM development. So we have the benefit in doing this work of seeing how EIM has already worked, how the market works under stress conditions, how the market works on regular days, how we can build on that with EDAM and start testing that and figuring out what it looks like to join EDAM as we move forward on for discussions on governance. And then the important part of this, as I've said, is realizing the cost savings from the West-wide market. Broad Western footprint, maximizing benefits, maximizing the use of the renewables that we're bringing online, and being able to have visibility into resources to optimize market operations. And then increasing reliability throughout the West through visibility and optimizing resources. Again, that's my last point. That one of the goals of this is to provide a way to achieve the benefits of the West-wide market for both costs and reliability. And then, as I said before, optionality. So if additional services are desired, this would provide a way for us to build on this independent entity to eventually provide RTO services. Let's see, is there one more slide? Okay, yeah, that was the conclusion of my slides. And I'll stop there, and we will have time for questions, and so we can go into more details as we move forward. All right, so I think I'm turning it over to Letha.
Thanks so much, Alice. Can I check, Alice, that you can see me?
Yes.
Okay. Oh,
Letha, can I stop you for just a second?
Please. Oh,
so yeah, so folks, so far we don't have any questions in the question and answer pane. So please feel free to open up that question and answer pane and think about if you have any clarifying questions. And as Pat emphasized, there is the opportunity to respond in full to this event today, as well as to the Phase 1 straw proposal that was posted on the landing page this afternoon. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to respond. But if you do have clarifying questions during the day today, please don't hesitate. Okay, back to you, Letha.
Great. Thanks so much. And really want to appreciate the Regulatory Assistance Project's support for us as regulators, working our way through this process and supporting us, ensuring stakeholder engagement. To that end, I wanted to take a few minutes to recognize the Phase 0 comments. So many of you filed such thoughtful and thorough comments in a very short time frame. We really appreciated that insight. There was a lot of important detail in there, as well as sort of you were really clear about what you need. And so wanted to take a minute to walk through how we're thinking about responding to those comments before we go into the Phase 1 straw proposal. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the first thing that was really clear, which is entirely reasonable given how bare bones the proposal has been to date, is a lot of confusion about what in the world are we even talking about. And so I want to walk through a series of slides to sort of give you the concept, recognizing, having participated in the Governance Review Committee, there's a lot of detail here that will need to continue to be hammered out together with stakeholders, right? It has to be co-created with you. Regulators, state agencies can't bake this on our own. It has to be co-created. So just to start, to set the stage, today, the CAISO embodies at least two roles. They operate the CAISO Balancing Authority, and they offer a set of regional market services that other balancing authorities can choose to join or leave. And that's been part of the bargain, right? That's been part of what's made EIM really successful. Easy entry, easy exit, and for everybody except the CAISO BA, right? The CAISO BA can't leave. And that has created this real structural challenge around how should governance work. And when I think about what we're asking, what we have been asking the California legislature to do, it is to on an important level, from their perspective, give up control of the balancing authority with no off-ramps. Or with limited off-ramps. And that's, of course, a really hard ask. And then we're disappointed that that doesn't happen. I can't imagine any of us going to our state legislatures and making that ask. And I think that what is interesting here is we're trying to peel apart what is actually piece that needs to be independent right now and gives us a pathway forward. So here we have a model, CAISO today providing all these services, our balancing authorities from outside CAISO participating. And obviously I know there's 24 BAs. I didn't want to fill up the slide with circles. So let's go on to the next slide. Our proposal is, what if you try to peel apart the CAISO balancing authority from the markets pieces? And I know that has a lot of detailed questions related to it. They came up in the Governance Review Committee, but it resets the groundwork such that the CAISO BA begins to interact with the market in the same way that the rest of our balancing authorities do, and you can have a much deeper parity of privileges and responsibilities across all balancing authorities if you do that. And of course, still representing the opportunity for exit. In fact, a CAISO BA would, I assume, be able to exit if need be. And underpinning that would be this idea of getting to equitable representation, of having the balancing authorities have that independence and autonomy, and that this creates a lot of flexibility about how you move forward. So if we go to the next slide, in the future, for a BA that felt need, saw a customer benefit, had a legislative mandate to pursue being in a full RTO, they could pursue that with the new entity or whatever additional services. And so could the CAISO BA. They could do that together with a CAISO BA and their BA, or not. And figuring out how to hold the market co-optimization together while you think about what those RTO services are is not easy. There's a lot of complexity there, but I think it gives us a way to have the conversation that is not stuck in quite the chicken and egg situation we are today. Let's go to the next slide. I want to clarify some exceptions or questions from the comments. What is it we're trying to articulate here? We're trying to solve a stated barrier, something that has been in a response in across the West around how to go further. That California governance is controlled by California, and we got to figure out a way to make it independent. We're trying to maximize the customer benefit, both the investments that have already been made by California customers, but also outside of California, right? We've been working since 2014 to make the EIM work better, be more predictable, manage tight conditions better. And we have tight conditions across the West. We have a scarcity of transmission across the West, inside the CAISO BA and outside. And that's put the whole thing, the whole construct under strain. That said, we've had a lot of years working together to try to continue to increment that design. And we've made the biggest increment with the filed EDAM tariff and have a foundation there. And we're trying to build for that flexibility. We are not proposing an RTO. If an entity wants to stop at the real-time market or add the day-ahead market, or they see that they want to move on to the RTO, they have those choices. But I want to be really clear. We're not proposing that we build an RTO by January of 2024. I think, having worked on the Governance Review Committee on EDAM governance, that the rights and privileges and obligations of each entity in the EDAM structure is appropriate to what you're committing in EDAM. Not everybody in the West is in that same position, but for those entities that don't have an RTO on the horizon, I don't think there's a reason to slow EDAM. And there was a question about doing an RFP. And obviously, once you set up a founding independent board, that board is independent. And that could be their direction. I think the regulatory community is starting from the perspective of there was a stated problem, governance is not independent. How do we solve that problem to the degree that it is within our role or our ability to do that, so that existing investments, sunk costs are made the most of. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to ask Sivagunda here as well, I think, to join me, but I want to highlight that there was a lot of asking questions about viability and legal analysis, and a real breadth of views in the comments about what functions the new entity needs to take on to truly signify independence to some entities. And I just reflect that the functions you want the entity to take on shade the legal analysis or questions you might need to answer. And that's why we describe pathways. How do you blend a scope for the entity and its relationships back to the CAISO as an operator and the CAISO BA, such that you have a viable pathway. And I think that's the work of the launch committee that we'll talk about in the next section, is to look at that intertwined set of issues around scope and viability, or what are the steps, the hurdles you'd have to clear, the filings you'd have to make to implement that scope. And I think the proposal is quite different from the transition committee's evaluation, both because we have something different in our hands with having EIM and EDAM and 24 BAs operating in them and 80% of the load being optimized, but also because we're not trying to minimize duplication. I think there's a lot to learn from their good work and the good work of the Governance Review Committee after them. I think that means there's a lot we don't have to reinvent. But I think what we're trying to propose here is different. And Siva, do you want to speak more to these points in this slide?
Thank you, Lita. Just as way of introduction, I'm Siva Gunda, one of the commissioners from the California Energy Commission. Thank you so much, everybody, for being a part of the call today. Yeah, I think Lita really summarized it well. I think a part of the viability and the next steps needed would really be defined by what the launch committee and through the stakeholder input really considers as the optimal balance between independence and expediency of moving things forward, right? So I think what we would expect over the next few months is for various scenarios to be considered by the launch committee on saying, this is, here are a few pieces through which we can pursue independence. And for each one of those scenarios, there will be a number of steps that might be required that needs to be tackled. And we look to working with the stakeholder community and the leadership in California to work through that as those things evolve. So look forward to further comments on that. Back to you, Lita.
Thanks, Siva. Okay, next slide. We heard a lot, not surprisingly, about transparency. And I'll just reiterate that as regulators, transparency is a core value for us. And that's a big part of the reason we've been out with this idea early, before it has been necessarily as fully baked as perhaps some people would like it. We need to co-create it transparently with stakeholders. And so there were several really concrete suggestions about transparency in the comments, which I really appreciated. We will continue to post meetings, recordings. This call is being recorded. We'll post it and the documents to the Weeb site. Weeb's being very gracious in giving us a place to put things while RAP is lined up to help us with the facilitation. It was a great idea to pre-schedule monthly stakeholder sessions. We are proposing several dates. You'll see that on the slides, and we have created a distribution list. You can contact Carl to get on it, and really understand the frustration that operating. While there was real excitement that we're sort of operating without the preconceptions of an institution, there's definitely challenges to being outside an institution and an institution's existing contact streams. So ask for your continued grace as we try to find ways to ensure everyone who wants to hear about things hears about them. The best option is to let folks know to join the distribution list. There were also questions about the funding. As regulators, that's no surprise to us. We always have questions about where's the money coming from. So far to date, all the funding is 501c3 funding, and you can follow up on RAP's GuideStar profile. That funding is from existing budget that RAP has had to support Western regulators on markets issues broadly. It's supported us in other venues besides this one. We continue to engage in a wide range of venues. So that's how we funded it so far. It's quite a small amount of funding. And additional funding is going to be needed, and we really want to delegate sorting through the best way to resource this to the launch committee. We think the stakeholders need to make that decision about dependence and funding. And then if we want to go one more slide, I think we can pause for questions. I will just say, just to wrap up my piece, we've posted a document that responds to your comments, tries to lay out in more detail what we're describing here on the slides on the Weeb website. We don't expect that you've read it because we just posted it. And we look forward to engaging with you on it as we go forward. And you can digest it over the weekend and early next week. And I know many of you will be at CREPC, and I look forward to talking to you about hearing your thoughts on it, as well as, of course, the comment opportunity that Pat described. So, Carl, are there questions that I should address?
Well, there's one question here that's been asked about whether we've thought about in more detail about what our relationship with Weeb would be going forward. And I would just first of all say that the support that we've already gotten, that transparent website, has been, foundational to us being able to make things available to you. So we greatly appreciate it. And Letha, would you just like to say something about anything else about that question about the relationship with Weeb?
Absolutely. Several commenters pointed to Weeb's excellent reputation and in the West and what skilled facilitators that organization is. I think we need to recognize Laura's new in the role and getting her feet under her and doing a fantastic job. And they are hosting the largest CREPC meeting in their history, double the usual, which is a real testament to their their excellent programming. And so I just want to give them space to manage through what they have on their plates, and the conversation will continue. And we so appreciate that they've been flexible and supported us with the website. So it was really a delight to read in the comments what a trusted organization they are.
There are two very just practical questions that I can just answer. What's the web address where we can find the documents on the Weeb page? And I believe that web address is provided on the last page of the slides, but it's the WWGPI landing page on the Weeb site. But I believe we have a link to that later. There are a number of questions that are going to be answered in the next presentation, so I'm not going to answer those right now. So thank you for asking them. But I think maybe it's about time to walk through. Maybe it's about time to walk through the here. Laura from Weeb typed the link into the chat, so into the question and answer pane. So hopefully you can see that now. I've just shared it back out. Thank you. But maybe it's time to move on, Letha, unless you have anything else.
That would be perfect. Thank you, Carl.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful. Can you hear me all right, Carl?
Yeah, I can hear you really well. Thanks.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I have been asked to provide you an overview of the phase 1 process as it is currently being envisioned by this states group. So we can go to the next slide, please. So I want to just highlight there are 3 key facets of this phase 1 straw proposal. The first one being the launch committee, which we've already heard a little bit about. The launch committee will be a stakeholder comprised committee that will truly be responsible for overseeing and directing the work in phase 1. It will be representative of all stakeholder sectors and will be geographically diverse. It will utilize a working group structure to address the number of phase 1 issues that will arise as a part of this process. It will also be responsible for facilitating a stakeholder process with assistance from staff as needed, as well as from the RAP facilitation team. The launch committee, again, is able to develop working groups. So those working groups will be identified and members will be assigned by the launch committee. Each group can address specific topics. I think some great examples of topics that working groups could address as a part of phase 1 would be that threshold legal viability analysis for the independent entity that we heard from a number of stakeholders in their comments to our overview document. And of course, another working group topic could be the development of the various corporate documents that will be necessary for establishing the independent entity. These working groups will also be able to develop issue papers that can be vetted with the launch committee and the stakeholders as a part of the stakeholder process. We're also envisioning, or the states are also envisioning as a part of phase 1, the development of the nominating committee. I think the term nominating committee is familiar to most. It again would be a stakeholder comprised committee that would be responsible for seating the foundational board of the nonprofit entity. Something I want to underscore here is that we heard loud and clear from stakeholders that the timeline that was laid out in the overview document was perhaps too ambitious given the many competing needs of stakeholders today in the West. And so the states have gone back to the drawing board a bit and decided that the nominating committee could be formed towards the end of phase 1 with a founding board seated towards the beginning of phase 2. And really quickly before I jump to the next slide, I will have a later slide where I walk through the timeline for phase 1 versus phase 2 as the states try to be more responsive to stakeholder concerns. But I just want to say really quickly that phase 1 kicks off essentially now, September through January, and that phase 2 would begin in January and wrap up in May of 2024. So I will again go into more detail on the critical steps that we are currently envisioning for both of those phases. So let's go to the next slide. So the launch committee, will have a number of important responsibilities. So, if you are interested in the launch committee, please do not take this responsibility lightly. It will be, again, a very ambitious set of goals, but very important goals. So I want to reiterate that the launch committee will be able to set up working groups that can help address the number of responsibilities and tasks that we have proposed for the launch committee as a part of phase one. So those are laid out on the slide here, but just want to highlight a few things that the launch committee will be able to do. They will be able to adjust the timeline and milestones for phase one as needed, agree on funding and staff support for phase one as needed, utilize independent legal advice to determine the feasibility of various scenarios. This would be the different corporate structures that could be established for the independent entity. It will also be able to decide on the form, mission, and scope of that entity, as well as develop the charter and governing documents necessary to establish that entity. It will also seat the nominating committee near the end of phase one. Importantly, the launch committee will also be critical for facilitating the stakeholder process that we heard was so important to our stakeholders in their comments. This process has to be one that is transparent, flexible, inclusive, and adaptive. So to assist the launch committee in facilitating that process, the states are envisioning potentially staff assistance, but also assistance from the RAP facilitation team as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of how the launch committee and nominating committees will be formed, I'll talk a little bit about forming the launch committee on, I believe, the next slide. But really quickly, I just want to outline how we're envisioning stakeholder sectors for both committees. You can see the stakeholder sectors listed on the left-hand side of the slide. Welcome feedback, whether we have inadvertently left any sectors off, but we were trying to be as inclusive as possible as we were envisioning which stakeholders are likely to engage in this process and stakeholders that we would like to see engaged in the process. For decision making, I think that there was some general agreement that consensus is the ideal. Where consensus can be reached in these types of stakeholder committee models, that is certainly what everybody would like to see happen. However, consensus is not always possible, and so where consensus cannot be reached, some type of simple voting framework will ideally be established for these committees. An example of a simple voting framework could be something as simple as each sector having a vote and the majority vote prevailing. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in terms of forming the launch committee, the states have thought about what this process might look like, and I have set that out on this slide for you. So the states are requesting stakeholder volunteers to actually help form the launch committee by October 6th. So if you are interested in being involved in forming the launch committee, you should email Carl Linville with your interest no later than October 6th. Carl's email is provided on a number of the slides, and it's also included on the final slide. The states will be organizing a meeting the week of October 9th for those volunteers in order to accomplish the following. They will agree to the sectors that will be represented on the committee. They will identify the geographic representation of the sectors. They will conduct outreach to sectors in order to obtain suggestions for individuals to be on the committee. And of course, they will be forming the launch committee by October 20th. Another key date that is not listed on the slide that I want stakeholders to be aware of is that the launch committee would have its first meeting the week of October 30th to identify the following: the highest priority tasks for phase one, the necessary working groups to successfully implement those tasks, the leadership of the working groups, a process for staffing the working groups, and how to engage with stakeholders, and really clarifying what the stakeholder process will look like for phase one. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. Looking ahead to phase two and the foundational board, again, we've been trying to be responsive here to stakeholder concerns regarding the timeline. So the nominating committee is not envisioned to be formed until closer to the end of phase one. The nominating committee would be established, would be approved by our launch committee. And the nominating committee would be responsible for essentially identifying and seating the foundational board. And that foundational board would not be seated until phase 2. The foundational board is important. It's important to distinguish this from a typical RTO board. While we would like to see a foundational board be independent, it will be primarily responsible for establishing and setting up the independent entity in phase 2. So it will need to be independent to meet stakeholder needs, but it will not have to meet the more stringent independence requirements as established by FERC for RTOs and ISOs. That being said, if this effort is successful, there will be a triggering event at some point, which would necessitate the seating of a truly FERC independent board, or an independent board that meets FERC's requirements. And so as you can imagine, the foundational board will likely have some processes going on side by side as they are trying to set up the entity, enter into contracts for market services. They will also need to be identifying and seating the more permanent board for this independent entity. The other factors I would note for the foundational board is that the states are currently considering this board to be a 5-member board. I think that that's been pretty consistent across the West and the various boards we see in our industry. There is a desire to strike the appropriate balance between having adequate representation, diversity, but also ensuring that the board is the appropriate size to be nimble and to act quickly so that we can meet some of the ambitious timelines that have been established for this initiative. And then the final comment I'll make is that the nominating committee will seek the launch committee's agreement on the foundational board selection. So let's go to the next slide. This final slide is the timeline slide, just so that it's a little bit more clear what the states are hoping to accomplish within each of these phases, noting that the timeline itself has been stretched out into May of next year. Again, the critical steps of each phase are outlined on this slide, and I've already spent a little bit of time talking about each of them, so I don't think that I will go through every step. I will simply underscore the fact that the goal here is to try to seat that foundational board by March of 2024 rather than January, which was originally indicated, and then also to establish the nonprofit entity by April of 2024. I will stop here. Carl, I don't know if you want to take questions on the phase 1 straw proposal now, or if you would like me to turn it over to Siva to clarify next steps.
Let's answer a couple of questions. First of all, there are a couple of folks from entities that don't neatly fall within the sectors that we identified. And I'm just wondering, how will they be allowed to participate, or how can they see their opportunity to be represented?
So I will just, I'm going to take a first stab at this and say that I think the ultimate goal here is to ensure that all stakeholders have a place within the stakeholder process and that they can be represented in some form on the nominating committee and launch committee. So ideally, each stakeholder needs to ensure that they can identify with a stakeholder sector. And so if that means that we need to be considering the addition of a stakeholder sector or broadening the definition of existing stakeholder sectors to accommodate everyone, I think that is something that would make complete sense going forward. And so what I would also say is, if you feel like you fall, if you are a stakeholder who feels like you do not fall into a current stakeholder category, we would really appreciate that feedback. And if you have suggestions for perhaps a new stakeholder category that we have not considered, please do let us
know. Someone else asks, when we use the word states, do we mean the regulators that have helped to develop this proposal, or do we have something else in mind?
I will defer to one of our state representatives on today's call to see how they would like to define that, but I believe that is designed to be broader than simply regulators. So either Siva, Alice, Pat, or Lisa, I welcome you to clarify that one.
The group has included both POU regulators and energy agencies.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about the composition of the launch committee and the nominating committee. And I would just volunteer that the number of seats, the composition, the sectors are starting point recommendations, I believe, that are made by the states. It's anticipated that the volunteers that come forward to help formalize the structure of the states committee will negotiate and decide on that. And we'll need to decide on it quickly in order for us to move forward to the important tasks that need to happen in phase one. But would anyone like to add anything to that answer? No.
Yes, Carl, if I
Yeah,
could,
go ahead.
I think it's thanks. I think it's important for stakeholders to think about what we're trying to accomplish in phase one versus future phases, we're trying to balance the need to entities were really clear around their decision timelines, and so for folks that want to see this move forward, there's a need to move with some speed. This piece of the work in phase one is really laying that foundation for a board that then would take up the really fine-grained detail around how you would do governance of a tariff. And having participated in the governance review committee, I know how extensive that is. So I guess I would just, phase one is not, but there'll be a lot of very fine-grained work to happen in phase two. Phase one, I think, is very structural. I would think of phase one as very structural. How do you set out the principles and this entity needs to live under, as opposed to, we're going to get to some really fine-grained details on how governance is going to function at a detailed level. So just to help stakeholders understand sort of what they're signing up for.
Great. One final question, and then I'll turn to Siva to talk about next steps. Was any thought given to using the launch committee or a subset of the launch committee as the nominating committee? It might uncomplicate and streamline efforts and assist in meeting the timeline.
I saw that recommendation from Tony in the Q&A, and I think it's an excellent one, and certainly something that should be considered as we continue to iterate on what phase one looks like. Anything that can streamline the process is most welcome.
Okay, thanks. Sorry we can't get to everything right now, but as I said, we'll be able to submit comments, and we look forward to continuing to talk with you about these things. And so for our next steps, we'll turn over to Siva.
Thank you, Carl. So I asked which slide I could talk to, and they wanted to look at the least complicated one. So I'm going to go through this so I don't make any mess up. So the meeting recording will be posted soon to the Weeb landing page again. Thank you to the Weeb leadership for facilitating that. For any responses you might have to questions, but also the documents that have been posted today, please respond with any of your comments by October 13 to Carl or Andrew at the email addresses that are listed here. And as a number of us spoke today, this is something that we all believe is a worthwhile effort to kind of continue the benefits of EIM and the work we have done in EDAM, and how do we move forward with the venue for continued steps towards broader integration. And so we really would like you to consider volunteering on the launch committee. And for those of you who are interested, please notify by October 6th. As you've seen today, RAP under the leadership of Carl will coordinate meeting of volunteers for the week of October 9th. And a number of us here, including colleagues across the West, both regulators and energy officers will be at CREPC. And please make appointments with Carl if you would like to meet between October 4th and 6th. And finally, please come to our phase 1 monthly stakeholder meeting, October 20th, November 17th, December 15th, and Jan 19th, and the timings are listed there. So in closing, I just wanted to extend my sincere thanks to colleagues from RAP, Carl, Andrew, and Jennifer for their support of the effort, and each and every one of you who has taken time to join us today and ask questions and participate. We take your attendance as your interest in helping frame this conversation and move the conversation forward. So we look for ideas, creative ideas to solve some of the needs that President Reynolds articulated early on, and the proposal, and we would like you to see as proposal as a good starting point that really will evolve under the leadership of the launch committee and move the effort forward. And we're here to support you all with any questions and further work. Thank you. Then back to you, Carl.
Okay, well, I think that's it for today. We will have the recording of this posted. It most likely will be Monday by the time that we effectuate that. But we will be issuing a couple of follow-up questions for you. You can begin immediately to look at that document that's posted on the our landing page on the website and think about what comments you'd like to submit there. So thanks for joining us on a Friday afternoon. And I hope you have a great weekend. Bye-bye.